So if you're looking for the best possible way to build a very, very good looking and professional shelf, but also still has that very, very sturdy feel to it and is able to hold a lot of weight, then you've definitely clicked on the right video. So stick around because we're gonna be going through a step-by-step process to build these shelves. We're gonna try to keep it simple, but give you all the information you need to walk you from the beginning of the process to the very end, the final result, finishing everything up, finishing touches to make everything look clean and perfect and like it was done by a professional. So just to briefly go over the tools you're gonna need for this project, you're gonna need a drill, and I would highly recommend getting a Craig jig online. We have a link in the description. It's like $18 on Amazon, so it's really not too bad. You're gonna need some wood glue, and then clamps are optional but very nice to have. You can substitute clamps with a brad nailer or maybe some screws, but clamps are probably your best option. So let's get into it. For materials, you're gonna need plywood. Now you're gonna have to calculate for yourself how much plywood you need depending on the size of your shelf, but you will need a piece for the bottom of your shelf and a piece for the top of your shelf. And then you're gonna need some face frame material. I recommend using 3/4 inch plywood, and then you can have an 1.5 by 3/4 hardwood. You can get this anywhere, or you can get a wider board and rip it down, obviously. Whatever you need to do there, but that's what you'll need for your materials. So you're gonna start by cutting down your plywood pieces, one piece for the top, one piece for the bottom. In this case, I'm gonna be doing a 12 by 34 inch shelf. So my plywood piece will have to be 11.25 by 32.5. So you can cut that down. So when you're cutting your plywood pieces, you need to cut, depth-wise, you need to cut it a 3/4 inch more shallow than you want your total depth to be because you're adding the hardwood in the front. And length-wise, you need to make it an 1.5 inch shorter than you want your total length to be because you're gonna add a 3/4 and a 3/4 here. So just deduct that from your total measurement, cut them, and then you'll add on the 3/4. So now you got your plywood pieces cut out, you gotta get your Craig holes cut in. So you will only need to do that on one piece. The other piece is only going to be glued because you don't have room to get into your shelf. So just take one of them, and I would recommend, at least for this size, I'm going to do probably 2 on each end and then maybe 4 down the side. It's also a lot easier to use the jig with a clamp. So just any kind of a vise works. Clamp it onto your board. You can hold it with your hand or something if you need to, but it's just a little bit more tricky. So I'd recommend trying to keep your Craig holes or your screws at least within 7 or 8 inches of each other. If you go any further than that, you can get a little bit of extra movement. So just make sure you put plenty in. I recommend between 6 and 8 inches between screws. Okay, perfect. So I got my Craig holes the whole way around here, all ready for screws. The next step is going to be cutting out your face frame. So if you got all the Craig holes in it and all ready for the screws, We've got 2 on the end to go into that piece, and then I did 4 on this end. These are like 8 or 9 inches apart, which is acceptable, and then 2 on this end just to pull everything in. So the next step is going to be to cut out your hardwood for the outer edges of your shelf. So this is probably the hardest part. It's really not super difficult, but you do got to get it right. So right here we've got total length of 32.5. So you have 2 options here. You can miter the corners, which gives it a little bit more of a professional clean look, but if you're not comfortable with that, and I will show you how to do that, but if you're not comfortable with that, you can just cut your hardwood piece a 3/4 longer than the shelf on each side, and then just butt up your pieces on the end into that. That works just fine, and it looks pretty good. But if you want to take it to the next level, then you'll have to go through the mitering process. So you're going to get a total overall measurement. So you're going to cut your piece at the exact length of your board, but it's short point to short point, and I'll show you what that means at the saw. So you want to pick the better side of your wood, whatever that is that you choose. I'm going to just cut off the end just to get the 45 and to get it nice and clean. This is not the crucial cut, so just set your saw at 45 degrees, make a nice clean cut. Here's what I'm talking about. So this is long point, this is short point on a 45 degree angle. So you're going to take your measuring tape, and what I recommend doing is locking your tape, setting it up on your piece of wood, and just to be a little bit more accurate, you can set it, put the 1 inch mark right on your short point, and then you just have to add an inch to whatever your dimension is going to be. So in this case, I want it to be 32.5, so I'm going to make a mark at 33.5 because I'm holding it at 1 inch on this end. So 33.5, and that's going to be short point. So now I just need to make sure that I start cutting right there and that the angle is going out this way. So you can just take a look at it, make sure you hit your mark. In this case, I pretty much got right on. I'm just going to take it to the board and make sure it fits perfectly in case I want to trim off. And I would actually recommend just cutting it hair long. And if it's right, you leave it. And if it's a little long, you can cut it down. In this case, it's right on. Now my side pieces. Once again, my total length is 11.25. So short point to here is going to be 11.25. And this is going to be cut straight. So only 145 for this cut here. So I would recommend cutting your straight side first. So just whack off the end. If you cut the straight end first, it's just a lot easier to get your measurement, so you can just hook it on like a normal human being. Make your mark at 11.25. Boom. And then you got to translate that to the top just so that you can see it as you're cutting. Put your saw at 45 again. Make sure that's your short point, right at 11.25. Looks like I hit my mark again. So this should be the right length. And this should all come together. Perfect. So now you're going to cut one more piece, 11.25 for that side. You just got to think through your miters and make sure you get them right. Once again, I'm going to cut off the end. Back to 45, and you're cutting on short point. All right, so I got all my pieces cut. All right, so another perfect 45. So now you are ready to start assembling your pieces. So you're going to take your piece with your Craig holes in it. I would probably recommend starting with your center piece and just get it put on here perfectly centered. Make sure your miters are coming right into the edge of the plywood on both ends. So you're going to apply wood glue, and you want to be pretty generous with it because this is a big part of what's going to hold your shelf together is the glue. Even more so than the screws, believe it or not. Just make sure you have the right size screws for your pocket holes. You can get face frame screws if you want to, and those are made for it. Just start on one end, get it, like I said, generously glued. That's going to be your structural integrity, and just get it lined up perfectly. You can clamp it here just to hold it in place while you're screwing it if you want to, but you definitely don't have to. So your first screw is definitely the most crucial. After you get your first one in, it's pretty easy to kind of hinge on that one and keep everything nice and straight. If anything, you want your hardwood to extend just a little bit out past your plywood, because you can sand down the hardwood and have no problems. If you sand too hard on plywood, you can go through the first layer. But you also want to make sure your plywood is not, like the sum total of your two pieces of plywood is not thicker than your hardwood, or this will not work. All right, so once you get your centerpiece on, you can take either side, and that's going to be your next step, is popping that on. Now make sure you glue your miter, so put glue on the end there, and once again the whole way down the side. Keep it generous. If it oozes out a little bit, not a big deal. That can always be sanded off after the building process is done. So just make sure it's firmly into that miter. Now for your final piece, same as the others, generous glue, hit the miter. One thing, if you do have difficulty with getting it lined up on your first screw and you already have it started, just take it out and try the other one. That way you don't have a hole that's in the wrong place that you're fighting with. So just anything you can do to keep from fighting with it and to keep it all aligned. Your next step is going to be your bottom piece of plywood. This one can be tricky. Make sure your board is clean, because they are going to be face to face, and so to get the proper thickness, you can't have anything between them. And it is going to be, it's going to fit very, very snug, as you will find out. You can cut an angle on them if you want to get them to fit better, but this one looks like it's going to fit, so I'm going to get some glue in here. Once again, glue is your friend here. In this case, glue is the only thing that's going to be holding it, so make sure you got good glue and glue up the ends, and then you just got to figure out a way to drop the thing in there. Keep it back just a little bit from the front of the hardwood so that you can slide it into the glue instead of pushing all the glue down. So pop that in there. And if you got a mallet or something that you can tap it in. This is a nice mallet, good brand of mallet. Once you got that in, make sure it's also down the whole way. I could leave this exactly like this, come back the next morning, and this thing would be completely structurally sound. But if you have clamps around, just take your clamps and use it to just tighten everything up, especially right on your miters there. If you can clamp it down, it gets everything a lot tighter. Your miters are one of the more important spots because that's what you're going to see the most. Now, if you're doing painted shelves, it's not as crucial to get your miters right because you can just putty or caulk and paint it. In this case, I'm doing quarter-tone white oak shelves, so you're going to be seeing everything. So after you got it all clamped, just inspect it a little bit, make sure your miters are tight, make sure everything's good to go, and then let it sit for at least a few hours. In this case, I'm going to wait till tomorrow morning, come back, and perform the next step right now. So we're back a few days later. The shelf is completely ready to be sanded, ready for the next process. So we got to start by just sanding down these ends, get them all nice and flush, and then we're going to go through the finishing process and they'll be ready for installation. This side that we installed first is fairly flush, so it's not going to require a lot of sanding. This side is a little bit less flush because the face frame was a hair wider than the plywood, so it's going to take quite a bit of sanding, but you have to be very mindful of the plywood and try to not sand through the plywood, the first ply, or you'll lose your look. Now, just to be clear, if you are very limited in the tools that you have, you don't have to sand it down. I mean, you do at least need to remove the glue and whatnot, but it wouldn't have to be all flush. This is just for quality purposes. So the sanding is complete. We use 100 grit sandpaper, and now we're just gonna hand sand the edges. So just take them down pretty good to take off the sharpness and also make the finish hold better on the corners. So we have it in here ready to be finished. So I'm going to do just a brief sanding with a higher grit sandpaper. This is a 320 now, just to take off any rough spots before I finish it. So I used 100 grit sandpaper for the initial sanding to get imperfections and blemishes out, and now I'm taking a 320 to it just to take it down smoother for the final finish. Typically we would spray on the finish, but in this case we're going to try brushing on the finish just because most of you at home are not going to have sprayers, and so we're just going to do it in a way that you will be doing, hopefully. This brush is a little small, but we're going to roll with it and see how it goes. So you want to do what you can to get it on pretty thick, but also spread it out nicely. Typically this is a 3-coat process. This is not a shelf for a customer. It is a shelf for personal use, which is why we're able to do it a little bit more of a DIY process. So the first coat is on. We're going to let this dry, give it a quick scuff, and do the second coat. So the first coat is dry. Take your 320 sandpaper or something of that nature and just lightly scuff it. It doesn't have to be anything serious, but you do want to hit the entire surface. And this is just to take off any bumps. And this is what is really going to get you your final very smooth finish. You're not going to get that unless you do the mid-coat sanding process. So the second coat went on well. It's looking good. Just gotta wait for that to dry, give it one more scuff, and then it'll be the final glassy smooth coat that we're not gonna touch. All right, so this is the final coat. Take your time on this one because this is the coat you're really gonna see. So the finish is on. It went on really well overall. I'm actually impressed with the finish. So I would be pretty comfortable with doing this in your own project. This method worked very well. So we're gonna let this dry for an hour maybe. So we're gonna take it to the location and install it. Show you guys one of the best ways to install it. So the shelf turned out really great actually. The finish is significantly better than I even expected. It's a finish that I would be very comfortable using. So definitely a great option for the homers. So we're gonna be mounting these shelves with these rods, which I think is one of the best ways to do floating shelves. So these rods screw right into the stud. So you want to get them level, and then you drill a hole in the shelf and it just slides right into the shelf. So we'll show you how to do that. You're going to start by first of all getting your height. In this case I'm going to do, and you want to go to center of the shelf because that's where you're going to be putting your rods. So to the center of the shelf I'm going to do 24 inches. And then you're going to find your studs approximately at this height. Go quite that far. There ain't jack frickin' there. This is insane. Dude, we're frecked.
It is.
We're gonna embrace it all right.
Embrace it.
We're gonna embrace the mess. What the hang, brother?
Poke some on the other side.
Oh, it's not a big wide one. I thought it was a wide stud. Yeah, well, there's our stud. The rod's gonna be way shorter than I was wanting it to be. Where are my drill bits? So we ran into a bit of a problem where there's no legit stud anywhere here, and this is where we want it. But we did find one that's on the other side of the wall that we can sort of hit. So I am gonna have to get longer pegs, but I can still show you guys exactly how it needs to be done. Just drill a hole, a pilot hole in your stud, and then take your rod, spin it into that pilot hole, and you will probably need a spinner McJigger McDonner. So they do give a little gritty spot here to grab onto and spin it into there. In this case, that's going to disappear into the wall, but if you have a normal house with normal studs, that will not happen. This one is more like it's supposed to be, so drill your depth, and I would say if anything you want it to be, your peg to be tilted up just a little bit because the weight is going to be pushing it down and hopefully straighten it out. So we've got those in there, and so I'm gonna start my shelf pretty much against here. So wherever you're gonna start your shelf, measure from there to the center. So we'll go 11 1/8, 26 1/8. So then you're gonna have to mark that on your shelf. 11 1/8. What did I say? 26 1/8. So now you got that marked on your shelf. That is where you're going to be drilling your holes to slide the shelf into the pegs. So you're going to need a 1/2 inch drill bit for this. And you also can buy a jig that clamps onto the shelf to hold your drill bit in place. In this case, I'm not going to use it just so that I can show that it can be done without it. But we will link all these products in the description so you know where to get them. Try to get it all straight and line up if you can. We'll see how straight it actually is. make sure you clean out your whole goods so that your peg can slide in cleanly. And if you can buy the jig, because this is a little difficult to keep it straight. All right, so there that is. Try to get any dust out of them that you can. Line it up with your pegs. And slide it in. And that is your shelf. Now, I'm going to show you how you can adjust them if it's not level. So there, this side needs to come up a little bit. So all we're going to do is slide this off. These are like put off center. If you spin them, it'll put it up or down. So that's putting it up. So we're going to drop that one as much as we can. And raise this one up. So we'll see what that does. And now it's pretty much right on. So we got it completely hung, we got the pegs in, shelf is slid on, everything's looking good, it's level, we got it adjusted level. It is very sturdy, I would say for a floating shelf, these pegs make a nice sturdy system. Now this one specifically is not very sturdy at the moment because this side is not proper. So I am gonna have to get a longer peg of some type. You can get these in different sizes and that'll shore it up a little bit. But this side is pretty sturdy. You do still have movement, especially because this is a 12-inch shelf. So this is a pretty deep shelf. On a floating shelf, you want to have the weight more towards the back, and often they're not this deep. So in the back of the shelf, very, very sturdy. I can pull down on that and that doesn't go anywhere. So overall, a very great way of putting in shelves, and you know they're going to be relatively sturdy. And they are also pretty easy to use. So yeah, with that said, that's how you make your own floating shelf. Great product, professional product, and I think you'll like it.